James had always dreamed of living by the water. After years of working long shifts in the city, he finally bought a cozy wooden cabin on the edge of a sparkling lake. The cabin stood at the perfect spot. Tall pines swayed in the breeze, sunlight danced on the ripples of the lake, and the only sound was the call of birds. For the first time in decades, James could breathe without pressure. He woke early, brewed coffee, and stood on his porch watching the mist roll off the water. This place was his sanctuary. But as peaceful as the lake looked, he didn't know that trouble was about to come knocking, literally. Just a few days after settling in, James noticed a shadow moving across his driveway. A woman in a sharp blazer marched forward with fast, heavy steps. In her hand was a clipboard stacked with forms and letters. Her smile was polite, but her eyes were sharp and assessing. She introduced herself in a firm voice. "I'm Karen, president of the Lakeside Serenity Homeowners Association." Before James could even respond, she continued, "We keep this community safe, clean, and in order. Since you've moved in, you'll need to attend our monthly meetings and pay your first HOA fee by next week." James blinked in surprise. HOA. He had chosen this cabin specifically because the land deed said it was independent. Karen wasted no time explaining the rules. She waved her clipboard like a badge of authority. Every homeowner, she claimed, had to follow HOA regulations: lawns mowed to a certain height, fences painted in approved colors, dock permits issued only by her board. She even mentioned restrictions on the size of fishing boats allowed on the lake. James tried to stay polite. "I'm sorry, but my cabin isn't part of the HOA territory. I checked the deed carefully before I bought it." Karen's smile vanished. Her tone hardened. "Everyone here is part of the HOA. If you're living here, you follow my rules." "That's how it works." James said nothing more. He had dealt with people like this before, the ones who confused control with leadership. Later that evening, James went through his papers again. He laid the documents on his dining table: the land deed, survey maps, the county property registry. Every document confirmed the same thing. His cabin stood on private land, untouched by HOA boundaries. The next morning, when Karen returned with a bright pink welcome packet stuffed with rule books and fee notices, James met her at the door. Calmly, he said, "I respect your community, but my cabin is not inside your HOA. I don't owe you a single fee." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You can pretend all you want, but the HOA always wins. You'll see." She turned and stormed off. Over the next week, James began receiving notices taped to his door and stuffed into his mailbox. Each one carried the HOA letterhead and Karen's bold signature. "Failure to pay $300 in community. Fees will result in penalties. You are required to attend HOA orientation this Saturday. Unauthorized vehicle parked. Report for compliance." "Immediately." James chuckled softly each time, sliding the papers into a growing folder marked HOA harassment. He wasn't angry. He was patient. Karen didn't stop with letters. Soon, neighbors began visiting James. Some came nervously, others with sympathy. "Look, it's easier to just pay the fees," one whispered. Another shrugged. "Nobody argues with Karen. She always gets her way." But James stood firm. "My cabin is outside the HOA. You don't have to roll over just because she says so." The neighbors shook their heads, unwilling to challenge Karen's authority. James realized just how deeply her control ran, fear disguised as respect. A week later, Karen showed up herself, storming up James's porch as if she owned it. Her voice was sharp and commanding. "You think you're clever? You think you can hide behind some papers? Let me make it clear, this is my HOA territory. You either comply or you'll be forced out." James sipped his coffee calmly, then said only one sentence: "My land, my rules." The quiet confidence in his tone unsettled her more than yelling ever could. Furious, she jabbed her finger at him and hissed, "Fine. If you won't listen to me, maybe you'll listen to the law." It happened on a Sunday afternoon. James was repairing his dock when he noticed flashing lights reflecting on the water. 2 police cars pulled into his driveway. Karen stood proudly beside them, arms crossed like a queen who had summoned her knights. James wiped his hands. leaned casually against the railing of his porch, and watched as Karen pointed at him with exaggerated outrage. "That's the man! He's trespassing on HOA property. He refuses to leave. He's dangerous." The officers glanced at James, then back at Karen. Something about the calm man on the porch didn't fit the story. James didn't move, didn't argue. He just waited, knowing the truth, and something more was on his side. The moment the officers stepped out, Karen launched into a dramatic speech. She waved her arms, her voice sharp enough to echo across the lake. "This man is a squatter. He moved into property he doesn't own. He refuses to pay dues. He's threatening our community." Neighbors peeked from behind curtains and fences, some stepping closer to watch. A small crowd began to gather, whispering nervously. Karen raised her voice even louder, making herself look like the savior of the neighborhood. James remained perfectly calm. He leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed, eyes steady. He didn't interrupt, didn't shout back. His silence made her accusations sound desperate. The officers, scribbling notes, finally turned toward him. One of them asked in a firm voice, "Sir, do you have proof of ownership?" James nodded slowly. "I do, and I'll be glad to show you." James stepped inside his cabin, returned with a neat folder, and placed it on the hood of the patrol car. Inside were official land deeds, survey maps, and county registry documents. Every seal and signature was in order. The officers flipped through the papers. Their expressions shifted from suspicion to quiet realization. It was all crystal clear. This cabin was private land, untouched by any HOA jurisdiction. Karen stepped forward, trying to peek over their shoulders. No! Those papers must be old, outdated. This whole area is HOA property. I run it," she shouted, voice cracking. James finally spoke, his tone calm but firm. "You've been harassing me on my own land. And you know what the law says about false claims, don't you?" The officers raised their eyes toward Karen, her confidence visibly shrinking. James reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something Karen didn't expect, his own police badge. The metal gleamed in the afternoon sun, catching every eye in the crowd. Karen froze. For the first time, her mouth went silent. The officers stiffened, instantly recognizing his credentials. They exchanged glances that said everything. The man Karen had dragged them out to confront wasn't just a homeowner. He was one of them. Gasps rippled through the small group of neighbors watching from the roadside. Karen's face went pale as all her confidence drained away. James spoke softly, but the weight of his words crushed her. "You tried to weaponize the law against me. But you forgot I am the law." The officers turned to Karen, their tone now sharp. "Ma'am, making false claims to law enforcement is a serious offense. Wasting police resources is unacceptable," Karen stammered. But he still needs to follow HOA rules." Her voice was shaking, desperate, like someone drowning and reaching for anything to hold on to. The officers shook their heads. "This property is clearly outside HOA boundaries. You have no authority here," the neighbors whispered among themselves, some covering their mouths in shock, others smiling faintly at the downfall of the woman who had controlled them for years. Karen stood frozen, her clipboard trembling in her hands. The self-proclaimed queen of the lake had just been stripped of her crown, publicly. James closed his folder calmly, slipped his badge back into his pocket, and looked Karen in the eyes. "This ends now. If you ever step on my property again with false claims, you won't be facing an HOA dispute. You'll be facing legal charges." The officers nodded in agreement. One added, "And ma'am, you may want to reconsider how you run your HOA before more residents file complaints." Karen's lips trembled, but no words came out. For the first time, she was powerless. The neighbors, once fearful of her, were now staring at her with doubt and distrust. News of the incident spread like wildfire. By the next HOA meeting, residents arrived angrier than ever. People waved fee slips, shouting, "Where's our money going? Why did you lie about boundaries?" "We trusted you, Karen." The board members avoided eye contact, some resigning on the spot. Karen tried to defend herself, but the louder she spoke, the more the residents pushed back. The once tight grip she had over the lakeside community slipped through her fingers. The HOA wasn't feared anymore. It was exposed. And it was collapsing fast. Weeks later, the HOA was a shadow of what it used to be. Karen rarely left her house, her authority shattered. The neighborhood slowly loosened. Residents planting flowers, painting fences, and finally living without fear of fines. As for James, he sat on his porch one evening, sipping coffee as the lake shimmered gold under the setting sun. No more letters, no more threats, just the sound of water lapping against the shore. A neighbor walked by and called out, "Glad you stood your ground, James. You showed us we didn't have to live under fear." James smiled quietly. He hadn't just defended his cabin. He had given the whole community freedom. The lake was finally peaceful again, and this time no HOA could touch it.